Hello and welcome. This is Dave Michels hosting another Talking Points Chats. I'm with Dave Danto. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Always great to see you.
We have an interesting topic today. We're going to talk about the MTR potential fallout. So let me set the stage here to explain this conversation.
Please, that's interesting.
I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. The ones you have to explain, do the setup are the most interesting, right? So here's the basic premise. Microsoft recently just announced that the 1 million MTR milestone they passed. We already did a video on that separately. And Zoom just announced that they have 2 million Zoom Room licenses. And so the spaces are getting kind of saturated. Maybe not. That's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is that Microsoft has been building up its MTR ecosystem for quite some time. It started off, if you recall, with one partner. It was Polycom. And Polycom, I think it was actually with Link that they started off with.
Oh, so and then over Skype for Business. Yeah, the progression.
Yep. And then with Teams, they've been adding more and more partners because the ecosystem has been getting bigger, more demand. They need more partners globally. They need more variety of products. And so they've been adding a number of vendors. And so today you've got companies like Neat, Logi, Cisco. The list is actually quite long. Yealink, Jabra, AudioCodes, quite a number of companies in there. I'm not even mentioning right now because we're going to get to them later in this MTR ecosystem. And so, but the last vendor, I think it's the last vendor, maybe it's the second to last vendor that they added, was Cisco. Now, this is unusual. You've added the 800-pound gorilla last, and Cisco, of course, has an extraordinary overlap of customers between Microsoft and Cisco, very strong overlap of customers. And Cisco's available worldwide and has a whole portfolio of video systems. So my assumption is that you can't just add that to a functioning ecosystem without some fallout. What do you think of that premise, Dave?
Well, let's take a quick step back. And while I agree with everything that you said, we have to talk about my enterprise days, 15, 20 years ago, and you were in the enterprise as well. Microsoft and Cisco were, and to a certain extent still are, religions. They're not vendors. They're not customers. You're either in one camp or you're in the other. And there was never really very much crossover. You'd have the one CIO come into a firm that was in one camp and change everything over. But other than that, everybody pretty much stayed on their sides in a real stranglehold co-opetition kind of situation.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that, Dave. Okay. And I know where you're coming from. You're coming from, the Skype for Business and Cisco Call Manager wars. And those wars were severe, and I remember the Enterprise Connect keynotes where they would call each other names and all that stuff. So I agree with you to some degree, but as we know, about just short of 2 years ago, they called a truce to that. But the bigger point that I want to disagree with is that they actually have. I mean, Microsoft is all about the desktops and PCs and the desktops and servers, and those require networks. And the vast majority of their customers, Microsoft's customers and Cisco's customers, are common customers. They've actually had a very strong cohabitation rule and they've both been very mutually successful for a long time, where they've conflicted and competed in one product. But even that is over now. I mean, now they have to.
And it's more than over. I mean, the shocking part wasn't just that you can now use Cisco devices certified on Microsoft Teams. That was shocking enough. Now you have people that were tried and true Microsoft people saying, really, Cisco makes some pretty nice stuff. We use it in the network. Let's look at it. And you have the Microsoft people looking at it. I mean, not just that, they also happen to be the only vendor out there that is allowed app switching, which is a business.
They have most favored nation status. That's right.
If you ask about it from a technical standpoint, they'll say, well, it's just because it's different and it's on a different platform and it works different. But the reality to the end user is you can switch between WebEx and Microsoft Teams on a single device, and you can't switch between Microsoft Teams and anything else between calls on any other single device. Everybody else.
Well, no, that's not true. Say it correctly.
Everybody else needs a reboot.
There you go. Yeah, you have to reboot them. And so they have a most favored nation status. And but to your point about the competition in the past, Cisco a few years ago renamed their video systems, their video system hardware as WebEx devices. But then once they reached this peace accord, they went back to Cisco devices because a lot of these Microsoft Teams people don't like WebEx, but they're happy with Cisco. And so they renamed those devices back to Cisco video devices. So anyway, so the assumption is you can't just throw in an 800-pound gorilla like Cisco into this MTR ecosystem without some sort of fallout. Now that when I say some sort of fallout, that fallout could be a lot of things. It could be multiple vendors don't succeed. It could be one vendor doesn't succeed. It could be Cisco doesn't succeed. And so that's the point of this video. We're going to kind of talk about some of these vendors in particular, and talk about some of their strengths and weaknesses in this survival context.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, because the people who are looking at the Cisco endpoints for Microsoft Teams hadn't considered them before. It's a whole bunch of new customers that Cisco are selling to, and they've just leapfrogged a lot of the competition that they had been struggling against for the last few years. And struggling is a bad word, but it's really put them forward in a way that they weren't before. And there will be some ramifications to that one way or another.
One way or another, there's going to be some ramifications. So let's go ahead and start off with some of the bigger vendors. I'm going to pick HP Poly. We've already mentioned them. They were the first ones in the hopper. They've been with Microsoft the longest, and very innovative company. So we've seen. As I mentioned, it started with Polycom, and Polycom merged with Plantronics, and has since been acquired by HP. So quite a bit of changes on that side of as one company. And so let's start with the negatives, right? What if I say to you that they're not going to be successful? What would be one of the reasons you think that it would be them?
Well, as you know, I worked for that organization for quite a period of time, so I don't really want to say anything negative that could get me.
You want to play it safe, so I'll go with some negatives.
The reality is, and this is not an opinion born of when I was working there. This is an opinion born of looking at the market. HP and Poly still haven't really put anything together yet. It's been a couple of years. We're expecting, Infocom will perhaps have some of this. Other than co-branding and the new headset and a couple of other things, there haven't been really, and the loss of a dongle. You no longer need, when you're using an HP headset on an HP computer, you no longer need to have the dongle to get, high resolution audio. But, there's been a lot of opportunity to really understand what both product lines are, and no one's seen any of it to date.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. They have actually, and your wording was a little off. They have put things together. They put the R30 and the hub together, but they haven't made any new products yet that are kind of leveraging both technology stacks. So they made some interesting bundles, and you mentioned the headset dongle. But yeah, I think and they've had enough time to do so now. So that's one reason why HP Poly may not be successful. So the bigger question would be, why wouldn't they have done that? And it could be because, and we talked about this in another video, AI has changed everything. And so there's a new AI priority, and there's new AI PCs, and there's new focus on PCs. And so maybe their focus and priorities and capital investments and R&D investments have changed to what they consider a bigger picture. And so that would be one reason. I got one other possible reason why they, on the negative side, and that's the leader. I think you know him, who put together the acquisition at HP, has changed roles. I think they sent him to Siberia or something like that.
India, not Siberia. India.
India. Yeah, very different climate. And so that was the guy that put that together. So that's kind of a bad sign, perhaps. Maybe the acquisition isn't doing as well as they had hoped or something. But it's impossible to know.
I think we have to look at everything there and everywhere else we're about to speak about in the macroeconomic conditions. AI is making people shift money. We've talked about that. There's been a lot of employee turnover. There's been a lot of employees let go at a lot of organizations. So, part of it could just simply be the bucket of money isn't as big, and they're focusing on what they think are quicker wins.
So we could reuse that one on every vendor here. But yeah,
exactly.
that's a fair. Now, but let's focus on some HP Poly positives. And there's actually quite a few. There's actually quite a few. So the first one I'm going to point out is the synergy still makes sense. I mean, we're seeing a lot of these technologies come together. Cameras, speakers. In fact, the monitors. Apple makes a fantastic studio display with the FaceTime video and everything. One device. It's got the camera. It's got the display. It's got the speakers. It's got the microphone. This is a logical peripheral device, and Apple's not the only one doing it. I've seen one from Lenovo. I've seen one from some other vendors, and this makes perfect. This synergy makes sense, and I think that was a big part of the logic behind HP buying Poly.
And if you look at some of the other players that you're going to get into and compare them to the HP organization, you would have to think that HP's existing relationship with Microsoft as a PC manufacturer would give them some type of favored nation status there as well, that there would be some more leverage with Microsoft than maybe the standalone Poly prior to the merger would have had.
If there's any company that you wanted to use as a poster child for how to successfully partner with Microsoft, it would have to be HP. People might say Intel, but that would be short-lived answer because Microsoft's partnered with a lot of Intel's competitors much more successfully. But HP has been there from the beginning and has done so well with that Microsoft partnership. And it's not just knowing; it's also that world distribution. I mean, Microsoft needs partners that can provide a product globally and consistently. And again, HP's got a very strong global presence.
Yep.
Let's go to a much smaller vendor. Let's go to Neat. And I'll put that down as the first negative. They're a small vendor. They don't have a lot to work with in terms of bundles like HP might have.
Well, Neat has a very interesting history. They that's part of the Tandberg diaspora. The Oslo Intelligence and Knowledge and gorgeous design. I think they just won 147 Red Dot Awards a couple of weeks ago. So I'm only exaggerating a little bit knowing those guys. But if you recall, they entered the world as Zoom only, and they spent years marketing themselves as we do Zoom better because we're Zoom only. And then on the turn of a dime, all of a sudden they said, oh, by the way, did we say Zoom only? Now we're Zoom and Microsoft only. So it's a little hard to take some of that messaging as in stone because what will they be next week or next year or next month? So, it's great products. We've seen some of them work. We're playing with some of them, but I wonder if the major bat turn in strategy is a plus or a minus for them.
I think it's been a plus. It's been lowering their costs, but they actually, that the negative that I have there, I already shared, is that they're a small vendor and they really can't do a lot of bundles. But boy, they make up for it with some creativity. Engineering powerhouse, as you mentioned, they're probably one of the most qualified video teams on the planet. They've got some great products. They've managed to penetrate some very lucrative accounts, some very big accounts, some very secure accounts, and they've done a great job with that. And there's one other little secret weapon they have that, to my knowledge, they haven't used necessarily, but they actually have Eric Yuan as a investor behind them. And that's the CEO of Zoom, for those that don't know. And so they've got some wherewithal and they've got some capability there that they haven't really quite flashed. But would not be surprised to see them continue to do well.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think, they just hired Kevin McMenemy as their CTO, somebody who essentially developed video at Cisco. So they've certainly got the brain power. They've got smart people there. I'm hoping for them and we'll have to see.
We're recording this, by the way, I'm just thinking weeks before Infocom. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the whole cast of characters, again, it grows more at Infocom. There'll be more of these vendors joining the Microsoft bandwagon, I'm sure.
Well, also, let's take that point there to just stand back for a second and say there's a difference between offering an MTR certified device and offering a device that works with MTR. We've got
USB. Yeah.
or a USB device. Now, there's no reason in the world why a USB device, one good example is the one we just reviewed, the Barco ClickShare, we'll come back to it, that they're not certified for Zoom or Teams yet. They're just a USB camera. They work perfectly fine with them. The question is, do they want to go through the certification process? It's new to them. It'll take a while for them to get up to speed on that. So, we'll have to have a debate at some point, another one of these episodes on the value of certification versus not certification.
Okay, so let's get back to Logi here. So, I think that if I want to focus on the negatives first, trying to be consistent, I think the biggest challenge for Logi is probably the leadership changes, right? Because they weren't a big video player. They had Bracken leading Logi, and they also had Scott Warden leading the video side. Both of those guys really prioritized video, really built I mean, they introduced the Meetup, they introduced the Brio. They put so much into that video story, and they're both gone. They were the champions of video, and so if you're the new guys at Logi, you of course got to evaluate: do I keep that going? Do I keep on investing in there, or do I invest in some other things? And they've also got a very strong keyboard story, a very strong mouse story, a very strong gaming story. Microsoft's changing up keyboards with the AI Copilot keys and stuff like that. There's a lot of opportunity there, and I just saw that they're nailing it in their keyboard and gaming divisions. And so, it might just be one of those things where it's not the best opportunity to go after video.
Well, it's interesting in that they and a number of other companies saw the pandemic happen, saw their sales and their revenue shoot through the roof, and then set that as their future targets and growth. And that was not sustainable. That probably was not a smart thing to do. So when you're promising year over year growth and you're in a bubble, you're not going to get that year over year growth. And I think that has a lot to do with why the leadership changes happened at Logi. It was a situation where the expectations were not realistic. They did just come out with two. They're now their bar 2 and their version 2 and their desktop 2 and their everything 2.
The Meetup 2.
Meetup 2. They're out there. I don't want to use the actual name, but 2 is what's stuck in my head. Everything is their second version, and it's awesome that they've got some new innovation there. But I don't know. It's an interesting organization.
Interesting is kind of a subtle word. I'm going to just double click on that for a second here, because we were just at the Zoom event, and the Zoom folks were actually pretty positive on Logi, but a lot of the analysts weren't. And I think that is, you mentioned the Meetup. The Meetup 1, I remember, was a big deal. I remember talking to them about it and understanding all the work that they did. They had to isolate the speaker vibration from the camera. They were so proud of it. It was a big ta-da moment, The Meetup 2, I read about it on, I think it was UC Today or something like that. I did not even a press release sent to me, no pre-briefings or anything like that. I think that they're distracted. I don't think they have the same. I don't think they have the same commitment they had before. And so,
you had to sign up for their announcements, which they did in 3 different time zones as online webinars. 18 days before InfoComm was going to start, which is odd to begin with, but they wanted to differentiate themselves. Okay, I'll give you that. And when you join that webinar to get their announcements, they're not live. They're playing you back a pre-recorded package of videos that they recorded. That's never a good sign. Now, there was somebody interacting. If you typed a question, you'd get a typed answer, and they were accurate answers, and I appreciate that.
That wouldn't have happened on Scott or Bracken's tour. But let's focus on the pluses. And so again, like HP, very strong distribution. They've got global reach. They've got very strong distribution partners. You can get their products everywhere, from Amazon to your favorite PC reseller. They have IT trust them. And I think a lot of, we mentioned this earlier, a lot of synergies with meeting rooms and keyboards and peripherals and webcams. And so there's, if they have an IT trusted brand in that space, and they can leverage that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And they've also brought in a couple of really good people lately that have been in the industry from before. After they let go of, as you pointed out, the leadership, there are a couple of new people that have joined the organization that I do have a lot of respect for. But I don't know. It's The question you have to ask yourself as you go through all of these names is, how long will this organization stand as an independent organization? Who's the next on the target to be purchased or to be leveraged? I don't know. Logitech seems like a pretty obvious, candidate to be bought by somebody, in terms of its ability and its size. Who knows? I wish them luck. I think that it was awesome to see the meetup too, with the amount of sustainable materials inside it, and it's great to see the industry going in that direction. But obviously, I think their audience is being chipped into by the Cisco factor.
Actually, I want to emphasize what you just said about the green focus. Logi has gone all in on green and sustainability. I appreciate that. I think a lot of IT decision makers appreciate that. They're not alone. Other companies are doing that. I mean, Cisco's doing it in different ways. Barco's doing it in different ways, and so they're not alone, but they're certainly ahead. They've actually been doing it for a little while, and I believe, and I haven't been briefed yet, but I believe these new products are all green savvy. Is that accurate?
I would have to agree, certainly with the meetup too. They're talking about how it's very sustainably sourced, recycled plastics, a lot of recycling even in the packaging. So I would certainly agree with that.
All right. Well, that's great. So that brings us to Cisco. As you said, it may have been a shotgun marriage, but the marriage did indeed happen. And so I'm starting off with negatives, why it may not be successful. I'm going to start off with cheap. Cisco doesn't sell cheap products, and they may not be at the right price point for a lot of these systems. And so they may not win. They'll certainly win the larger rooms, the more advanced rooms, the more sophisticated rooms. But I'm not sure about the huddle spaces and the small rooms if Cisco can go cheap enough. What do you think of that one?
I think they've got some desktop devices. That's something that's part of the legacy Tandberg mindset.
No, it's not. It's actually not Tandberg. Things like the Desk Pro and the Desk Line. Those are reasonably new pandemic created products. But they are lower cost, but they're not Amazon purchases, right?
If you look over my shoulder, that's an old Cisco 7985, which was the old Tandberg device. I'm talking about the mentality to understand that people do want hardware devices on their desk sometimes. They don't want computer monitors. When I was talking to some of the people at Cisco last week, they're talking about how I just had to do 10 back-to-back meetings and I could never handle that on my PC and keep my documents open and keep everything else open. I want a dedicated device for doing video. So, I think that mindset that, sometimes you want a desktop video appliance is something that I think will make them stand out. And it is less expensive than a room system.
All right. Well, let's look at some pluses and some additional pluses. I already mentioned earlier that they have a large overlap of customers, and so that's a positive. Strong portfolio. Cisco's portfolio of video solutions, like we just said, desktop to boardroom, a lot of good stuff there. And you mentioned earlier their most favored nation advantage, without it requiring a reboot to work with Teams.
It certainly is a kick in the pants for WebEx. WebEx has been counted out so many times. It's had so many Band-Aids on the brand that I don't even know if I should be spelling it with a big, E or small e or little x, or I get confused how many times it's been rebranded, but that's certainly good for them there. And you know what? Ultimately, if you're talking to a large enterprise, the movers and shakers, the financials, the pharmaceuticals, do you really want to be dealing with multiple vendors that are making peripherals so you want to consolidate your vendors? If you can have Cisco and Microsoft and call it a day, that's perceived as a win for no other reason other than simplifying your life.
Yeah, we really haven't touched on management much of these platforms, but Logi and HP and Cisco all have comprehensive management solutions as well. But the key point that I want to raise is that if your environment is already using one of those management systems, that might be the straw that wins the argument, right? We don't want three management systems. We want one management system.
Yep.
Um,
And I would say that you could probably count on the fact that some of the Cisco in-room devices are going to start absorbing more features and functions. So in rooms where you used to have a Cisco controller and a separate controller for, shades and lights and things like that, I think, at Infocom this year, you're going to start to see some of those things merge. And you'll now be able to control everything from a single device, which will also be a Cisco advantage.
yeah. So just a few vendors that still stand out kind of big. There's a whole bunch of smaller vendors, but Crestron's kind of large, Lenovo's kind of large, Yealink is large. Any of those you think are in danger of the MTR fallout?
Well, I'm worried about Yealink and Microsoft and the government of China. There has been a decree in China that companies are not allowed to use American-made software products sometime in the future. I'm sure there's going to be back and forth conversation about it. But if there's a rift between China and Microsoft, that's going to put Yealink in a very bad position, and I'm sure there's going to be some sort of fallout from that.
I disagree with you on that one. I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure in the West to not use Chinese products, and a lot of pressure in China not to use Western products. But I don't believe that's going to affect the export game. And so you may not be able to use Yealink with Microsoft software in China, but I'm sure they can export it. And maybe they have to assemble the software pack in Taiwan or something like that. But I think they'll work around that one. But
Okay.
but that point though about we are becoming more geo aware of these boundaries, and that could hurt Chinese companies. And I think Max Hub Chinese as well. Not
A lot of
100%
things, and a lot of things are built there.
Yeah, a lot of things. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, so those. What about Crestron?
Well, this is not Crestron's only business. I think they appreciate their relationship with Microsoft, and I think Microsoft appreciates them. Crestron's video bar, their bar 70, which hopefully we'll be getting to test soon, is the only one on the market right now that has 4 camera elements in it, 1 wide and 3 independent narrow ones. I think the key with a lot of this going forward is going to be differentiation. Who's got the better feature and who's got the better function? I don't think they've got a huge number of products there, and I think a lot of the products that they do make are going to be used no matter whose video conferencing is used. They still have
they fit a very specific niche around those room controls, and a lot of customers are just non-negotiable. We're going to go Crestron.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wouldn't worry about them as an organization. I don't know, how effective any of their products are going to be from an MTR perspective, because they've changed them so many times. But I think the new with the 70 looks like it's good.
Now, here's a trick question. How about Yamaha?
Well, Yamaha's already announced that they're leaving the UC industry. They're doing away with the Yamaha UC division in the US. They're absorbing whatever products are going to remain just into the Yamaha corporate headquarters. You say Yamaha, and the first thing you think of are musical instruments and piano.
No, motorcycles.
Oh, or motorcycles. Depends what your background and perspective is. But it was an interesting opportunity for them to join. I think it's a crowded field, and I think we're going to start to see some fallout. Bose sold the entire Bose Professional team to a new group that's calling themselves Bose Professional because they didn't want to be in the business anymore. Now Bose Professional is still in the business, but how long will that be when it's just an offshoot of the company? Sennheiser split with their EPOS group, and now they're in there's going to be a lot of this shifting. And one of the things we talked about in one of our insider reports, which hopefully people who are watching this have read them or subscribed to them, is that we're seeing a lot of companies not be married to things that they used to be married to in the past. Just because I've always made a microphone doesn't mean I have to make a microphone. I can still go on and make motorcycles. And we're seeing a lot of companies do third party, we're no longer making this product, but now go to them because they're our favored nation. They're the ones that are going to be making it for us. I think we're going to see a lot of that readjustment over the course of the next, year or so.
Great points. Another one that's kind of interesting is Audio Codes, because Audio Codes has actually been a Microsoft partner for quite some time with the SBCs and working on the voice side, but they're really doubling down on the contact center solutions and of course their meeting room solutions. And so they're kind of all in on Microsoft Teams right now. I suspect they'll do all right because they have a good, strong bundle story for Microsoft Teams IT manager. They can turn to audio codes for a whole bunch of different pieces. So that might work in their favor, having all those different pieces. I think we've covered most of the vendors. Barco, you mentioned, Bose, you mentioned. We haven't really talked about Lenovo. I always thought Lenovo was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to HP Poly, and they weren't that committed. I think they have one or two products very similar to the bundles that HP had done. I'm not sure how committed they are. So maybe the answer is some of these smaller vendors will fall out and they'll just lose interest as the space gets more competitive. But
I think it's also interesting just to point out that there are more vendors that we haven't mentioned. Little vendors, big vendors, ODM manufacturers, etc. If we're making these for company A, why don't we just put our own logo on it and try and sell? So the market is continuing to saturate. The prices are continuing to drop. And it's going to be that differentiation that's going to sell some of these products. And the other thing that you pointed out at the very beginning, is that there are other video conference players out there right now. We talked about the 1 million MTRs. What are there, 2 million Zoom rooms out there right now? So players that do both have an advantage or can sell to both.
It's actually really hard to compare that 1 million MTRs to the 2 million Zoom rooms, but a lot of people will be surprised that Zoom is a bigger number than Microsoft, and it probably is a bigger number than Microsoft. They've been at it for longer, but it's important to note that these are not quite the same numbers. It's hard to, vendors never describe their numbers the same way. So Microsoft was very vague. They said 1 million MTRs connected. So we don't know if that's simultaneously connected or what. And Zoom was a little more specific. They said cumulative licenses purchased, and so not connected at all. Doesn't matter if you. And so you have to do a little massaging and guessing and all that stuff. But probably Zoom's numbers are a little bigger than Microsoft's. I think you were championing that argument because they've been at it for longer in the Zoom room space.
Zoom rooms have been good for longer than Microsoft rooms have been. Microsoft got more customers in other spaces than Zoom does.
And they're also smaller. This is the same thing with I mean, you tend to have larger number of rooms when they're smaller. And I think a lot of these Microsoft MTRs, they started bigger. They started with much bigger rooms. So it'd be pretty typical to put in one MTR on the second floor where you might put in 2 or 3 Zoom rooms on the second floor, that kind of thing. But anyway, we don't have a crystal ball on how the MTR space will fall out, but it's an interesting conversation. All of these vendors, of course, like in any situation, have their strengths and cautions. And what we wanted to do was kind of highlight those and discuss them and get you thinking about them. I hope you found the conversation interesting. You can subscribe to wherever you're listening or viewing, subscribe, and maybe we can entertain you once again.